The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, good evening, everyone. This is the special study session that the Westminster Council is providing, and the purpose of this one and the next three to follow this will be a discussion on water and wastewater infrastructure and how we get rates, how they're established, and more of the details, so that not only council will have a refresher of all the parts that make up our infrastructure, but also for the public to listen in and get a better understanding of how this all happens in a city. Heather Berkman will be our moderator for tonight and will be leading us through the events. So Heather, I know that all the council members are here. between you and Julie Kohler, I'm going to turn it over to the two of you, and Heather, if you will, take over.
Thank you very much, Herb. So we have lots to talk about today, Council, and Julie, if you'll show us our next slide, we could get after it. So Council, I just want to give folks a quick reminder of how we got here. You, of course, remember, but not everyone who's watching does. Over the summer, I interviewed each one of you, and you told me your thoughts related to all things water and wastewater rates, infrastructure, questions that you had, conversations that you'd like to have, etc. And based on that, I sort of grouped your questions and topics into a few different meetings. And so tonight is the first of 4 workshops where we're going to have kind of a different type of conversation. And I do want to stress that I envision it to be a conversation between all of you, with each other, and with Julie as well, and anyone else from staff who needs to weigh in as we go along. So tonight's first meeting, we're going to do a little bit of setting of the stage, just to maybe think a little bit differently about how we talk about such things. We do have some quick questions for you all related to community engagement. As you know, there's a lot of community interest in this topic, and we want to make sure we have your thoughts on how and when to engage the community. So we'll talk about that for a quick minute. And then of our 4 topics, tonight is really focused on water and wastewater infrastructure, how the system works. And so Julie's done a fair amount of work to prepare a slide deck for you on that. Then I appreciate the lines between these things are really gray, but then for our next conversation on October 20th, we'll talk about water costs and rates. And then on the third one, which is on November 5th, we'll talk about wastewater costs and rates. And then number 4 is where the magic happens. This workshop on November 17th is where we're all going to talk about, okay, now that we know all the stuff and we all have the same information, what do we want to do with it? How do you all envision going forward with water and wastewater rates? I heard there were some conversations in town today about rates for 2022. You could absolutely, address that as part of that conversation that we start there on the 17th. So that's going to be here's what I think the answer is. Here's what we ought to do. What if we this? And how about we that? All that cool, juicy, fun stuff comes up in that fourth meeting. I'll talk a little bit here in a minute about how we're going to roll with each one of the next 3, because you can still do some discussion in these first 3 as well. So I don't want you to feel stifled, but I do want us to stay focused on our topics so we get through all the things. So Julie, if you give me the next slide, please. There has been, as you know, a lot of interest in the community about water and wastewater rates. I asked staff to send me a list of the high level topics and things that you are hearing. And that list is here. I have combined a whole bunch of things. So if the sort doesn't look right to you, that's on me, not on staff. Heard some concerns about meters. Are these meters accurate? Why do we have these meters? Why do we change? Whatever's going on with these meters seems to be related to a substantial increase in the cost of my water. So meter stuff. Overall rates and comparisons to other areas, where our rates, what they are in Westminster, when they're different in Broomfield and Arvada and other places. You've heard a fair amount of specific concern related to the Tier 3 rate, the tiering structure in general, but Tier 3 rate in specifics, and the impact that it has specifically on large lot owners. Heard some concerns in your community about billing periods. They are variable. Why is that? What is the length of them? Why is that? And the variability and the length of those billing periods and the impact they have on monthly bills. You've heard that there are some perspectives in the community that the utility department has a lot of money, and if they have so much money in whatever accounts they have, why do we need to have such high rates? Heard some questions and concerns about number of water taps in the community and whether and how the number of taps does or does not affect or drive rates. And then specifically, again, for this summer, it was hot, it was dry, and folks were watering a lot, and boy, did they see that show up on their bills. So these are roughly the key themes that we've heard. And what I want to tell you right now is you will have, in the course of your time together, time to tackle every single one of these. But they don't all fit in our conversation tonight. And so, Julie, next slide. What I wanted to make sure that you know is for each one of these topics, or each one of those questions fits pretty nicely into one of these top 3 discussions. The questions about infrastructure, the questions about all the rates and the things probably fit mostly in, most of that goes into the second session on the 20th. We'll talk a little bit about rates tonight, but the juicy bit comes in there on the 17th. That's when you talk again about like, what do you want to do? How do you think we should tackle all those concerns that you've heard from the city in combination with what you hear from your colleagues on council and what you learn on these next 3 workshops. Julie, next slide. So just to stress again, tonight we're talking mostly about infrastructure. Julie's going to talk a little bit about the new meters, but not a lot. That will come up mostly again, metering in the next one on the 20th. On the 20th, we're also going to talk about overall rates, tier 3 rates, billing periods, how much money utilities has, where they have it, why they have it, and the number of taps. Then, as part of primarily the meeting on the 17th is where we're going to talk about, wow, the rate structure, it impacts people, particularly when there's weather. Do you want to change that? Do you want to think about that? What if we? Rates generally, do we want to change those? Do we want to think about them differently? What if we, how about we, could we try? All that stuff's going to come up at the end there. So 2022 water rates can be part of the discussion at any time as it relates to these discussions, but the what should we do in 2022 is probably coming up there at the end, November 17th. Why does it say 11th? I don't understand. We don't know. And then the other thing that we've, the meters again, they're going to talk about them a little bit tonight. I know there's been a lot of information sharing around meters. That's also going to be mostly on the 20th. So council, if you have a lot of thoughts about those, if you could just be mindful to try to keep it to the meeting where we're hoping to talk about it, I think you'll have a lot of information at that meeting to build on those topics. Julie, next slide. So given that there's that level of community concern, we got to figure out with your direction when and how to engage them. I've talked with staff a little bit to identify what we think are 3 options that are pretty viable as a starting place. I want to stress to you that if you think all of our options are terrible, we would welcome your suggestions for something else to do. But basically, we have 3 sort of thoughts. The first one is the one option, which is that after we spend all this time together in these workshops, you all come together and maybe hone in on what you as a group think is a pretty good option. And that we would go to the community with that option and say, hey, community, what do you think about this option? And then we would bring that information back to you all, and then you would integrate whatever you hear from the community into a revised final thing and carry that forward. So the circles at the bottom show you council identifies an option, community provides feedback, council integrates feedback. Staff is part of this conversation to be sure, but just big, sort of big picture components, that's what those are. This item would require then for you all to converge on a single option. And maybe that doesn't feel comfortable. Maybe that doesn't feel likely given where you are now, and that's okay. So Julie, next slide. So the next option is very similar, but it assumes that instead of honing in on 1, maybe you hone in on 3. It could be 2, it could be 4, let's 3-ish. What if we do this bunch of things? Or what if we do this bunch of things? Or what if we do this other bunch of things? You identify whatever those packages of ideas are, and then those go out to the community, provide feedback on all of them. And then with the revised, with that information that we bring back to you, you would revise it probably down to a single option. You'd say, okay, it looks like most people gravitated to this one, but their primary concern was this other thing, and so we changed it. So some conversation again among you to get it down to 1, and then you're back to, hey, community, we're down to 1. What do you think? Any additional concerns, suggestions, changes? Bring that back to you. You integrate it to get to a final thing to carry forward. So those 2 options, the community engagement part of this effort then waits until later in the process, because it would require you all to come to 1 to 3-ish kind of options or packages of ideas. Julie, next slide. The third option is really different. And the third option, instead of waiting till the end when you all have converged, hopefully on some number of packages of things, we could go to the community soonish. And instead of asking them what they think about 1 or more final or preliminary final thoughts, we ask them questions about issues or items, topics that inform or impact rates. and ask them, for example, what is your willingness to pay for something, or what is your, your comfort with this kind of debt ratio, or this number of potential problems in your system, or whatever. I'm gonna talk more about the whatever in a minute. And let them give us some general sense of what are their priorities, what's on their mind. And then we would bring that back to you. And as part of your conversation, as we go forward into that fourth workshop, you would have that information to inform what kinds of ideas you would want to talk about. And then you could come up with one idea or two or three, and then we sort of still need to do that same public engagement once you have ideas. But this front loads some community perspectives into your thinking in a way that the others don't. Julie, next slide. So in a public engagement context, we think a lot about not just what's meaningful, but what's the level of effort. So the consult option number one, right, for community members to come together electronically, probably to provide feedback on one option, it's not a lot of effort. It's also not a lot of involvement, right? It's them providing feedback on something that you've already done. The upshot of that on the timeline front, it's a fairly efficient thing that could be done. The consulting on three options, three again-ish options, is more involvement, right? Because then you get to see more of the compare and contrast. We would ask things like, what do you like about this option? What concerns do you have? So you would have more information. It would be more work for the community, and therefore, it would probably take a little bit longer just to collate the information, give folks time to think about three things instead of one thing. That third option is the highest form of engagement that we would consider, and it might feel more meaningful to members of the community to take that approach. It is a higher level of involvement. It would also probably require a little bit more work on their part, and it would probably draw the timeline of this process out a little bit farther on the back end. Any of them is okay, but what we would love to know is generally what is your preference? Julie, next slide. And what we'd like to know is, okay, so this one is animated, Julie. So option one, that's the one, community provides feedback on one. You all do this work now, sort of through the end of the year. We don't want to do community engagement over the holidays in particular, because that's just a jerky thing to do to people. And so that might start sort of in January. Dates are highly ishy, highly variable. Next option. It probably starts about the same time because you would still need to do all of your work, but again, it's a little bit bigger effort, so it probably would take a little bit longer. And then third option, Julie, is something that we would want to start here lickety split. And maybe we go to the community twice with some kind of questions we have now, and maybe go back to them again with questions we have later. Again, we would want to think about that with your direction. Next slide. So whichever one we do, here are the assumptions that we're making. And I want to call your attention to this slide because part of what I've asked staff to do as part of this discussion with you all on water and wastewater rates is to call out their own assumptions. And so this will be the first of many assumption slides you will see in our time together. So assumptions for community engagement at this time are fairly straightforward. One is that staff would do broad notification as they generally do for engagement type things. Given the COVID situation, we would do online engagement, small and large groups, webinars, webpage stuff, all the things that are listed here. You could potentially do even focus groups. We've been doing those increasingly electronically instead of large meetings, because large meetings by Zoom are not particularly rewarding for members of the community. Obviously, we would document all the things that you would hear or that we have heard for you. There'd be both a summary and raw data for you to consider as part of your consideration going forward. And then, who knows what the future holds with COVID? It's full of surprises. So if something interesting happens one way or the other, we would probably be prepared to adapt to that as needed. If we get to meet more, maybe we do some in-person things. If we need to meet less, then we stick with the online stuff. So those are the assumptions. My question for you all on council is, without going too far down the rabbit hole of all the things that could be done in community engagement, if you could just give us generally your broad preference. What are you drawn to? Could you live with any of them? Is one a deal breaker for you? And then based on where most of you are, staff and I will prepare a more thoughtful document for you to consider on community engagement. So would love to see thoughts from council. And before we jump into that, I have a slide on this later, but council, we have a majority of you who agreed that we could do this as a conversation among neighbors and friends, and we could do first names. So as I call on you with your first names, I want your residents to know that I don't intend any disrespect, that we're hoping to have a less formal, more comfortable conversation, and sometimes first names help with that. So
Heather?
is there, yes?
Heather, before you go,
Mhm.
remind that this is posted as a study session for the city council. And that's how this is set up. So we are not prepared to open up chat lines or take comments or questions from the public tonight because it is a study session.
Oh, yeah, thank you for saying that.
that
But
is, yes, in the chat line from Matt Williams, but I know David has a comment that he was wanting to make.
Yep. And I want to say something just about, because I know a lot of people are watching, and I want to hear their thoughts. And so I want to come back to that, but go ahead, Dave.
I'm
And
just
Dave, are you
curious
David? David or Dave?
Dave.
Okay.
Around some of the option structures that you were talking about, I'm just curious. So it seems like this is probably taken off of kind of a starting point of where staff was directing us before COVID hit, because a lot of what I'm hearing from you with some additions is kind of the process that they were going through. They had 3 options. We had even taken those out to the community. So how much of what they were trying to do prior with, you know, some adjustment is kind of that same structure that we were seeing at the beginning of this year?
I'm not sure I understand your question. Are you saying, like, are you concerned that the content of the options might be the same as the content of options that you previously considered?
I wouldn't say concerned. I'm curious if
Curious.
if they're part of what we're being shown tonight, or what, not necessarily tonight, but you had given some options and some of them sounded like the options that were being presented to council and the community at the beginning of this year.
So my view is clean slate. For whatever we go forward to the public with, it's whatever you all want to talk about. And so if there were previously things that were discussed and they're still interesting and useful to you, magnificent, we shall carry them forward. If you have better, different, more ideas to engage with the community, we would use those. Does that answer your question?
It does. I mean, it just seems like there's been some comments in the past couple of weeks about these talks that, you know, that they did feel that what direction we were going down is the right direction, but we were going to talk through that. So I'm just trying to get a sense of how much of this is, you know, still based on that same direction.
So having not participated in if we're talking substance, previous conversations on wastewater for the future, I haven't been a part of any of those. If some people think that was on a great trajectory, fantastic. I want to hear from those people. If some people are thinking we want to throw all that out, baby and bathwater, and start with something new, I think that's great. That might suggest that we end up going to the community with multiple options and see what they think. And I think that would be an okay choice. I myself, Dave, make no assumptions about the content of what you would take to the community. I expect you all to tell me what that is going to be at that 4th workshop.
Understood, but I mean, it's still, to me, just to put it out there to the group, I mean, some of what we just saw is what we saw at the beginning of this year that we literally took out to the community. Maybe not the ins and out details, but the structure of it is very similar to what we were doing at the beginning of the year. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just trying to level set and understand how we came up with the prior slides that we just saw.
You're talking about the process for community engagement.
The process, and for example, hey, here's 3 options. We had 3 options at the beginning of this year prior to COVID. So maybe you didn't get that part, but so I'm just trying to understand the driver behind those options.
Yep. So if the process looks the same, and then because there were 3 options in this process and there were 3 options before, and it looks a little fishy to you, I didn't understand any of that. These are my suggestions. This is generally how we do stuff.
Yeah.
So
nope, that's fine. And I wouldn't say fishy. I'm not at all coming at it from a suspicious. It's more of a curious, like, how did we come up with that?
Generally, there's 2 kinds of public engagement. We talk about doing it before a stakeholder group does stuff and you're technically right now the stakeholder group, or we do community engagement after a stakeholder group does stuff. And so these are mostly pretty consistent with 3 kinds of options that we propose. So the content of the conversation with the community will be whatever it is you all decide.
Great, thank you.
You bet. Any other thoughts? Anyone gravitate toward one or the other of the options? Anita?
Yeah, if you could help, I think I'm having like a knee-jerk bias here, and I'm hoping you can walk me out of that. The third option that you mentioned with kind of so much front-end community engagement, I love that for processes like a comp plan, right? Where there's a lot of different options to go to. This is both qualitative and quantitative, but like the needs assessment and like kind of determining that feels like it is heavily influences what the options will be. And so the last time we kind of, I agree with Councilor DeMont, we've kind of already as a group had this discussion and decided on what is most similar to what your option 3 options choice is. And the reason I liked that is it really kind of allowed us to hear the qualitative tolerance and concerns, like level of wanting to invest in our infrastructure versus like concerns about rating, but within guardrails of what would still allow us to do what's the minimally responsible for our community. Or if we were to do less, understanding what those specific impacts were. So can you walk me through what a more robust community input on something that is so data-driven would look like? And what I don't like to have is expectation mismanagement. And so I feel like we open ourselves up for the potential of expectation mismanagement in that, dashed expectations in that situation. So I think if we're going to open it up to that early feedback, we should be really clear with what our interests are and kind of our guiding principles are as the voting. Am I making myself clear? Because I wouldn't want people to feel like we turned a deaf ear to what they said.
You're right. And that is the biggest risk. And so whatever we do, we need to be, so my number 1 rule is don't ask if you don't care. And the second rule is once you decide you care, make sure you ask a question that informs your conversation. You don't just say, so what do you think we should do? Like, that's not helpful. And so this wouldn't be a, like, so what do you think we should do question. What I have learned in my time with staff is there are some fundamental sort of threshold questions that they identify sort of internally in their own thinking that you as council could provide feedback on. And again, we'll call these out as we go along, but also that the community could provide feedback on. What is the community's tolerance of risk of a water main break? Staff has made an assumption about where they think that level is, and maybe the community's level is different. I'm trying to think of the other ones, but I can't think of anything. So willingness to pay is a great one. Just generally, what are you willing to pay in your monthly bill? And then there's a teeter-totter, right? You don't get to just pay low and get high value, right? There's a moderating effect somewhere along the way. I don't know where it is. But I've done a meeting for Denver Water on their water rates where we just went and did focus groups and said, okay, roughly with this package of things, what's your willingness to pay? With this package of things over here, what's your willingness to pay? Or here's a bunch of potential things that could influence the size of the magnitude of rates. Which of these things are important to you? Which of these things are not important to you? Because we make some assumptions as professionals in the field about what's important. Not everybody thinks those things are important. So there are things like that where we're not asking them what you should do, because there's an expertise component in that for sure. But we can ask them what's important to them. What do they value? Where do they teeter-totter where there are some questions like that? It won't decide the thing. It might actually make your decision making harder as council, because it will give you information that say, some people are like, this is where they're comfortable and we need to find an answer within this box. Or you might learn that you have a very diverse community that has a lot of different perspectives. But it might give you a sense of how much of what you hear from people is representative of the community, as opposed to just representative of the people that you hear from. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes the people we hear from are a beautiful representation of the community, and sometimes not. So that's to help you inform your options. And that's how it's different, right? Coming to them with options, the advantage of that is you've already tried to fit the pieces together in some ways that are workable. where you've balanced some of the trade-offs differently in one or more options. So it's a different way of doing things. And some members of the community like those because it's very concrete. I can look at this option, I can read the things, and I can say, that is a terrible idea, and let me tell you why. And some people prefer the other kind where they're like, you're asking me the wrong question. You're asking me to choose between three things, but you never ask me what's really important. Because what's important to me is woven differently into each of these choices. So it's a different way of doing it. I would just ask you that, like, if I have made no assumption that I'm involved, I said we a lot, but that's just because I'm a sloppy speaker. But the careful thought would go into whatever the community questions are so that they were appropriate, they were meaningful, and it wasn't just tell us some things so we can ignore you, because that's unacceptable. Does that help you, Anita, or not?
It does. And then I have a second part question. With these assumptions, I don't see anything that specifically talks about reaching out to traditionally marginalized groups, giving voice to the voiceless. Oftentimes, every single community has it. The people who know how the systems work know how to reach out to their city councilors, and people who have no idea that's even an option. So how do you broaden what that community engagement actually looks like to hit deeper into our community?
I don't know that I want to make up methods, having not worked in your community specifically. I would just be really winging it. What I would say is having it not on this list was absolutely an oversight. And I'm 100% sure that I speak for staff that that a meaningful effort would be made. And if people have ideas about how to do that, we would be really eager to hear them, because engaging marginalized communities is a constant struggle and challenge. So if you have ideas, send them along if you would.
No, I just found it relevant to determining how much community engagement to have on the front end to make sure it's a really representative sample. That's all I just meant it in the context of this conversation.
Totally hear that. Yeah. Herb, do you have a thought?
Actually trying to keep an eye on who's popping in. I think Councilor Scully was trying to get in, so I'll let her go first.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, sir.
Hi,
Catherine, what's up?
Hi, Heather. So I'm gravitating a little bit toward that third option of engaging the community. I'm wondering if you can, and I know you just helped Mayor Pro Tem Sites a little bit walk through it, but I'm still very cloudy on how would that work? How exactly would we engage with the community? Would we do, like in the past, we've done public meetings where we have all attended the meeting with the public, and we've broken into small groups. Are we thinking that way? Would we do it around the city? I'm just looking for more definition, I guess.
Fair enough. And given the COVID disaster that makes community meetings almost impossible to have, my number one answer to you is I'm not entirely sure. But here's the kind of things that I have done for other people. One is you can't do this quite so well in GoToMeeting, but in Zoom, you can have a whole bunch of people join and put them into small groups in Zoom to do a similar thing that you would do if you were in person. So you can do a version of that. I've done with a couple clients where they do a recording of a PowerPoint so that everyone has the same information. And then you click here to just answer survey questions. And so for this kind of thing, it isn't choose the option that you like, but on a scale of 1 to 10, move this toggle, tell me how important this thing is to you, and then tell me why in the comments box. I would love to do in-person focus groups. And if that's something you want us to consider and bring back to you as an option, I have done some in COVID. There's just it can be done, social distance, et cetera. So the methodologies I think are many, and I'm happy to think more about it. And if more of you than not are drawn to that, I'd be delighted to sit down with staff and have us bring you a more thoughtful kind of presentation so you can be more comfortable with that approach. To Anita's question, I can show you pictures of other things that I've done with other groups. I can show you some of the methodologies that we would use. And then we could talk about engagement of marginalized communities, engagement of HOAs, and of different kinds of ratepayers to make sure that we have the demographic diversity that you have. So is that enough of an answer for now? I don't want you to feel like I'm dodging you.
No, that's a good answer, and it does clarify. The one concern I have is I love the idea of virtual. I love Zoom, and I love doing a PowerPoint and then having people answer questions. I love the idea of being in person too, but I sat through a meeting today for Adams County Tri-Health that specifically said we are increasing and perhaps reaching a dangerous position. So I don't know how much reality that's going to be. Excuse my cat who thinks that he should be in this meeting with us. But I am concerned about people who maybe are not, there's that digital divide
Yep.
that Mayor Pro Tem Sites always talks about, and I just appreciate so much. And I worry about the people that can't access us through Zoom and PowerPoints, and yet they may be the ones who are experiencing the most challenges with their water systems. And so that's one of my concerns. So I do like that third option a lot, because I really love the idea of having our community engaged and listening to our community. I know we try so hard to do that all the time, but it felt in the presentation, it felt like it might be something that really would engage our residents, and I love that. So I am leaning toward that one, but I just wanted to know that information. Thank you so much, Heather.
And I'll just let you both know, I do a lot of work in New Mexico, and we think a lot there about marginalized communities, particularly in the Taos area, which has one of the highest poverty rates in the country, and have talked about ways in just general rural public engagement, particularly for marginalized communities, you go to where the people are. And the people actually are in a lot of places that don't involve technology, where you can engage them safely with masks and still do some of it. So I think if we were creative, we could really move the ball forward on that topic. Other members of council would love to hear your thoughts.
Councilor Demott, you're up next.
Thanks, Herb.
The other thing I'm thinking through, and I know that you originally reached out to all of us and talked to us about this idea, and council voted on it, and the majority decided to move forward. The other thing that I'm concerned about as far as like our timeline on here, and I mean, I know I agreed to these dates, but as I'm thinking through it, we kind of bought ourselves next year a little bit, because we decided that we did not want to increase the rates. So we unanimously said 0% next year. Should we spread some of this out to next year? And the reason that I'm saying that, whether it's these discussions or I don't want to discount the community engagement piece because of COVID right now. We don't know where we're going to be in November or December or January. But I don't want to rush this and and do it wrong. Like if we want to we do need some level of community engagement, obviously. The other thing that I'm thinking when I look at these options that I'm curious about is, at the end of the day, we have a finite budget. And so my thought is that we can't always just determine future projects based off of a finite budget, because that we can't necessarily always raise rates, and obviously I've been opposed to that. So I'd like to have in these conversations too some feel of, if we have a certain budget, at some point the city manager and director of public works needs to say, here's your budget, what are your priorities? And kind of to Mayor Pro Tem Sites' point, at least what I took from her point about having it more heavily driven by the community in the front end, that doesn't necessarily equal what we have to do. There are certain things that you have to do, and there are a certain amount of money that you have to do it. Yep. So as much as threshold is important to understand the community's threshold for things like water breaks, that part is really important too. So that's really two different portions, but I'm just putting it out there, especially as we go through this. I don't want to rush this. I feel like we have a lot of time since we did a kind of unprecedented thing in an unprecedented time and said we're going to do a 1 year no rate increase, and we're going to figure out where we're at. So we did that to buy ourselves time. So I guess I would ask the group that we make sure we're not rushing this.
Mm-hmm. So on that point, I am 100% sure we can slow things down if it's the will of a majority of you to do so. I think when we originally asked you what kind of time you wanted, most of you said, if we could get this done in a couple months, that'd be great. But I also appreciate that hearing now how this might unfold, maybe that feels a little bit rushed. Make myself flexible on the timeline. Work expands to fill the time available, so we wouldn't want to be overly sloppy with the timeline, but there is some room for wiggle room. Your point on priority thinking, and I'm not involved in how you set your budget, but I think you're really going to be jazzed about the kind of information that we're going to talk about at the next workshop on rates. Staff is bringing that information to you in a really different way that's more similar to what you were just discussing. So I think you'll find it interesting.
No, it sounds good, except for nobody has described me as particularly jazzed before, so that's new.
Mic drop. My work here is done. Boom. All right. It looks like, Lindsay, you have a question?
Yeah, Counselor Smith's up next. Then Counselor Seymour.
I think I got the window open now, Herb, so you can keep coaching me if you want. If not, you can take a break because I realized I had the wrong window open, so we're cool.
You got it, you're on.
I'm on it. Lindsay, what do you got?
Thank you. So I think, the most engagement we can have with our community is important, right? I think so. Option 3, obviously, but I also agree with Councillor DeMott in that I don't feel that we need to rush into making quick decisions, but we'd certainly take our time into gaining our community feedback. And then also much to Councillor, Mayor Pro Tem Seitz and Councillor DeMott's point, as far as it kind of seems like we've had this information before. And while there is some curiosity into how we got here, I know you answered that for Councillor DeMott. I'm cautious, right? I'm trying to go into this with an open mind, but what I don't want to repeat as far as the information is, and we've talked to you, Heather, about our questions and all the concerns coming in from our community. You've seen a lot of those. And so what I don't want to have happen is then it all get regurgitated back to us, right? And not have that dialogue piece, that missing piece with our residents. And I think it's super important. And I wish that one of our 4 sessions that we have here actually goes through and actually line by line, question, here's the answer, question, here's the answer. Because a lot of times we are responding back to our residents via email, but that's one-sided, right? Like we're not getting all of the picture. And I think that's part of where we're missing and not having that public piece to it as far as what everybody is hearing and piecing it all together. And so I just hope and encourage that we go through this with that public feedback as far as that we can get that dialogue from our community, because I think that's the piece that's missing in all of this. And so while I appreciate all of the information being brought forward to us as far as starting points, here we're at, and then moving forward, the whole timeline piece, I think we're really not engaging where we need to engage. I know we're getting there, but that's just, you asked for our 2 cents right now. That's kind of where I'm at. So
fantastic. I love your 2 cents. So thing 1, for the questions that I heard from council, this is the PowerPoint deck for you, because it literally says question and then slides that answer your questions. So there's that. What I will acknowledge that I have not myself thought about it sufficiently is to the extent there are additional or different questions from the community, when and how do we bring those in? Like in the previous slides, I had sort of bunched them into general concepts. I might work with staff to frame those as questions and then check them against some of the stuff I've been seeing coming in through public comment to see if we can do it for them as well. And if not, I might think about another way to do that, because I like your concept there about question and answer. So I'd love your feedback at the end of our conversation today, Lindsay, about whether you feel like the staff approach to answering the questions is what you're looking for. And if you need something different, could you let me know? That'd be great. All right. Rich, what do you got? And then council, I'd like to get this one sewed up here pretty quickly so we can get to work. Go ahead, sir.
Yep, just real quick, whatever amount of time it takes to use engagement number 3.
Fantastic. Well, you work quick. Thank you, sir. John, you have a preference one way or the other?
I like number 3. I think engaging our public and getting their input would be very important. So I would like to see that. That's probably my choice right now. Thank you.
Fantastic. And Herb, what do you think?
I don't want to take any options off the table to make sure that what we're going through because we know the public's listening, to give them as much education as possible and a refresher for a lot of us. But I am not tied to a date. We have a lot of things going on, and as a couple of you mentioned, our COVID numbers today are driving us very much in the wrong direction, and those numbers are growing.
Okay. So council, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would summarize our conversation as follows. Thing one, you are gravitating toward our option 3, which is early engagement with the community, and we should bring you a more refined proposal about how we would do that. And that proposal might include things such as, what are the questions we're going to ask so it's meaningful information and people understand how it is going to be used. Another one is, what specific methodologies do we intend to use? And are those methodologies going to be different for our traditionally marginalized community members, so that we make sure that we have a way to hear that voice in a way that's meaningful? Are those the highlights of that? I love the visual nodding. Thank you very much.
I actually put in that I'd like to make a comment in the chat bar.
Sorry.
So I actually am pretty cautious about option 3. I really like the idea of community feedback, but I never want to disenfranchise residents. And so if you invite people into this process, we really need to honor their voices. And I think it's almost premature to talk about community engagement options at this point in the exercise, because going through everything, we may realize we want a different type of approach. So I'm fine with option 3, because I always lean towards wanting more community engagement, but I just cannot emphasize enough how much I want it to be real, meaningful, that we are listening, and that we're not promising more than we can deliver because of that duty of care that we all have to the community. Councillor Demont said it very well. There are things that need to get done, and there's a certain amount of money. And so I want to be really careful that we don't overpromise in either direction.
I completely understand.
And I wouldn't
ask,
my concern.
And it's an important concern. And I think, particularly since I just keep telling you, I'll write it down and bring you something else, I don't even need for you to fully say, yes, I'm all into that, until you see more information from us. And then Anita and others, once you see that, if you feel like, oh my God, this is crazy, this is a promise we can't keep, or this is the wrong promise to make to the community, I really want to hear that. So with your permission, we'd like to get started on that lickety split and bring you a written proposal. The other thing, though, that I heard from several of you is maybe we have a 10-pound process stuffed in a 5-pound bag. And maybe to do community engagement right and to make sure we have time to have that meaningful conversation with the community, we want to slow this bad boy down. I am open to that. I check with staff. It sounds like staff's open to that as well. So again, if we have time, I'd like to circle back at the end, have you give me a sense of how much more time. I assure you staff would welcome the time, because it's hard work that they're doing to rethink the way they've thought about this stuff. I just need to have a sense at the end of the meeting about how much longer you want to wait. Do you want to go ahead with the 20th and then push the other ones out? So noodle on that if you would, and I'd be delighted to circle back to you. Now that I have the right box open, I don't see anyone else wanting to jump in. So I assume that means we cool and we can move on. Fantastic. Thank you. Julie, next slide. What is this doing here?
This
Oh,
is
this
where I live now.
Yeah. This is a quick thing on the new water meters, but I didn't know we put that one here.
Yeah. Let me talk.
Yeah, why don't you just tell us what this is for? It looks cool.
We've had a lot of questions about water meters, and some of them boil down to infrastructure, which is what I hope to talk with you about. Here's a picture of these new water meters. From an infrastructure-only perspective, we're spending $14 million to replace over 30,000 residential water meters. We chose them because in the longer term, they have lower maintenance costs for city staff. These are remote read. We're using cell phone towers and modern technology, and it will change the way we use our ops staff. Instead of driving around to read meters, they're going to get new skill sets with yes, fixing them and taking a look at them in the field, but reading the meters and using that data to inform what's going on with your water. Is there leaks? Is it high use, low use? These meters have a lot of technology advances that the other ones did not. Bullet 3, the next chunk of information, well, it's in the 2021 budget to buy a software package where customers can interact with the meter and learn more about the water meter and their water use. Some of this is in place now. Staff can see it, and that's how we're able to talk with our ratepayers. Moving forward, ratepayers, users will be able to use this software on their own. And from an infrastructure standpoint, I also wanted to tell you, and you'll hear this from me later a lot, these 30,000 plus residential water meters were at the end of their useful life. Parts for these were obsoleted. They are no longer available. Some of the meters themselves were obsoleted. Staff had to make a choice from an infrastructure standpoint.
And this is in here just because we specifically, some of you had questions about this. We want to make sure you got that question answered. I would encourage you not to go too far down this lane today, because thing one, Chris is going to talk to us about at the next meeting about how the metering relates to rates. But this is one of those things that if you want to put into the kitty for, I'd like to talk more about what we're going to do with these meters and all the things that Julie just said as a future thing, we can do that. Is this adequate information for now? Because we do have a bunch of other stuff to talk about. Yeah, Anita?
I promise I won't dominate with so many questions. But on this one in particular, one of the things, and I believe you're going to address it later, that we've heard in concerns from our residents on is the billing cycle, that it can be between 28 and 33 days. And I believe that is a legacy of us having people physically go and read the meters. With having meters that can be read remotely, will we be able to close that window to no more than a 31-day cycle?
Julie?
We will address that in workshop 2.
I think the answer is that is an option you can consider. There are with all options, there are trade-offs if you want to go down that path. But that's why I said Chris is going to talk a lot about this one when we get there. Lindsay, you have a question?
Okay, so it does sound like we're going to talk a little bit more because there is concerns. I think I specifically copied you on one regarding how we came to this particular one, because there was concerns of a faulty read, and then is it accurately reading? And if we can dive into that farther down, I'm great. Otherwise, let's keep going. But
Julie, do you feel like those are things that belong in our next conversation, or are those you want to tackle right now?
Next conversation.
Okay, so basic answer is here. More answer to your question, Lindsay, will come at the next meeting. And we have a slide now. Like, these are the questions that we've heard. And on that one in particular, it'll be exactly the format that you're looking for, I think. And if not, holler at me, because it'll probably be my fault. All right, next slide, Julie, if you would.
I had a question on.
Oh, I'm
on
sorry.
that.
I'm sorry. Go ahead,
That's
Jim.
okay. I'm just curious if because we have had a substantial amount of questions about this and concerns about it, and a lot of skepticism around the meters. And so if we have specific things that pop up between then and now, like, how do you want us to make sure that they're on the list so that they're prepared to deal with them when we come to that next workshop?
Oh my God, that was so great, because I was supposed to circle back to that and I didn't. So people have questions. We want to make sure we get as many community questions in addition to council questions answered as we can. As we're going along, we have the following choices. Community members can continue to send you all their questions and concerns, and you could just forward them to me and I'll make sure they get in the staff slide deck. If you prefer to send them directly to staff, that's fine too. The other option, community members, is to go to the website. And Chris, my understanding is there's a specific question and comment thing for the community related to water and wastewater rates. Is that right, darling? Or maybe Julie, you know? Somebody? Bueller? there's a place on the website. We're going to figure out what it is, and then we're going to tell you as soon as someone chats it to me. But people should continue to send questions because they come to us either through you or through staff. We will try to answer as many of them as we can. And that sort of also gets at Lindsay's thing, which is we want to make sure that this is engaging and interesting and educational for the community as well.
Well, and I guess, and I just want to make this point real quick while I'm thinking about it, and I'm not trying to go down the rabbit hole, but like the explanation that Julie just gave us is great to understand, and I think at top level it makes a lot of sense, and I understand why we would update technology and why we would want to replace them, but that has oftentimes been the answer back to skepticism and concerns when some people see weird spikes and to what they tell us when they even try to reverse their usage. So I just want to make sure that we're having a robust discussion around that below the here's our top level reason why we did it. I think all of us understand, and I think even probably had some of us votes on moving forward with that project. So
fantastic. And I think that's what we intend for the next one, Dave. We added it to that agenda, even though it wasn't originally included in that for this exact reason. So we can give staff some time to prepare some thoughts that are actually responsive to some of that deeper dive stuff. Goop. And Andrew put in the chat, community members, cityofwestminster.us/2022 rates. If you go there, there's an opportunity for you to submit a comment, and it can go to Andrew, and Andrew will bring it to us to make sure it gets in the slide deck. And if you have any questions, do reach out to the city and they'll get you in the right spot, because I want to hear your questions. But what I really want to do, council, is get to work on this water rate business, because we got a lot of stuff to talk about. So I have just a short couple of slides of my own that I want to crank through here, lickety split, to set the stage for our conversation, because I want us to have a conversation that's different than what you're accustomed to having during business meetings and study sessions with staff. Julie, next slide. So what I hope you'll see tonight and going forward is this is a fundamentally new approach for having conversations with council. The first one is similar to what you've said earlier. Is I heard several of you say, I feel like I ask a question and I am given information, but my question is not answered. And so I've really asked staff to focus in on unpacking the information, really identifying their own assumptions that drive the information that they give to you and how they present it. So there's a lot of unpacking happen here. I hope you see a different kind of information. Secondly, I'm going to talk with you a little bit about just trying to increase our shared understanding about our interests and our priorities, and how different people just approach these conversations differently, and how democracy nerds like me think that's the glorious thing about democracy, but it sure makes decision making hard. And so we're going to talk about choices and trade-offs. Anything that you do in public policy has a trade-off. That's just the way of things. And so we're going to call out in the slide deck and in your conversations, hope you'll do the same. Like, if we do that, does that mean we do more or less or different over there? Really going to talk about choices, consequences of choices, and our trade-offs. I would love for us to communicate a little bit more fluidly. You all run a very lovely, very formal council meeting. Hoping that today and in all these workshops, we can be less formal and a little bit more neighborly with each other, which I think will help the tenor of the conversation on hard stuff. We're going to talk about some options going forward. Again, that's your work later. And then we're going to engage the community. Again, that's sounds like what we're talking about today, is that will be throughout the process. But this is different, and it should feel different, and it feels icky and weird and uncomfortable. Different things sometimes do. So I hope you'll roll with us and maybe find it interesting in addition to being different. Next slide. So I want to talk to you a little bit about something that we call in our field the difference between positions and interests. Positions is the #1 way that we do stuff generally as humans in the world. We tell people what we want or need. I want that apple, I want a new car, I want a bigger house, I want fancy shoes. We want the things. Positions are super interesting. They describe the outcome, they describe the answer. They skip from now to the end. I want that thing. The challenge with positions is that they create this win-lose dynamic. Either I get the shoes or I don't, either I get the house or I don't, either we do it my way or we do it not my way. So there's a win-lose dynamic there that's really hard for complex issues like this one. Positioning only allows for a single outcome. Either I get my shoes or I don't get my shoes. That's the one choice. And so it does involve this yes-no dynamic. Interests are a really different way of thinking about things. Instead of talking about what we need, when we talk about interests, we talk about why we want it or why we need it. This is our underlying motivation, what we're trying to accomplish by wanting the thing or getting the thing or doing the thing that we want. So the advantage of talking about our why instead of our what is it allows us to create win-win dynamics. It expands the way we think about things, which I'll describe here in a minute, so that it's not I have to win and you have to lose. We can both win. It's not 100%, but it helps a little bit when we talk about public policy issues in a context of win-win dynamics and interests. And part of why it allows for multiple winnings is because it allows for multiple solutions. There are lots of ways to address an interest, but again, just the one way to address a position. So where in positions we see yes, no dynamics, in interests we see yes and dynamics or yes if. Yeah, we can do your thing if we can find a way to address this other thing. Yes if and yes and are game changers in the way we talk about stuff. And I've had stakeholders on hard issues, big and small around the country, who have a breakthrough once they get from their positions to their interests. So the easy threshold question about what you're saying and whether what you're sharing with the group is an interest or a position is how many ways are there to achieve my thing, to do what I want? If there's just the one way, everyone has to vote yes, you have to agree with me, do my thing, that's a position. If there's more than one way to achieve your thing, we could do this, we could do that, we could do this and that, that's probably an interest. Next slide, please. So fundamentally, when people talk, what they tell about, what they generally say is what's above the surface here. That's their position. It's a finite, a smaller thing relative to the size of what's underneath the surface, that underlying interest. Underlying interest for a single position can be many. Sometimes there's just one, but sometimes there's 6. And once we unpack them, we understand the thing better. So as we're going through again, think about do you have a surface level position or can we find that underlying bigger picture interest? Next slide. So I'm going to give you 2 examples just to set the stage and then we are going to move on here. So as a parent, if you were to imagine that you had 2 children and 1 orange, this is a wonderful world in which your 2 children are fighting over the last orange. Positional thinking has the children saying, I want an orange, I want an orange. And the way that a parent generally would solve this problem is you cut that orange in half. You give each child half of an orange. The good news is they each get half of what they want. The bad news is they each only get half of what they want. If you take an interest-based approach to thinking about this same orange, you would ask the 2 children why they want the orange. Imagine a world where one of them says, well, I want the orange because I'm thirsty and I would like all of the juice. And the other one says, I'm taking this cooking class in school and I want the zest to put into a cake. Well, that's a game changer right there, because instead of cutting the orange in half and giving each one half, you can peel the orange and give 100% of the skin of the peel to one child and juice the orange and give 100% of the juice to the other child. So now instead of each getting half, each gets all of what they want, still from the same orange. It's a very simple analogy, but if you let it guide your thinking, it will change the way you think about things. Next slide. In a slightly more interesting and relevant example, my very first project was on a river where the folks downstream found that it flooded a fair amount and they wanted to build a dam on the stream. So build me a dam is a position. When I met with them the first time, I asked them, why do you want this dam? And they're like, well, duh, to stop the flooding. Right, stop the flooding though is an interest, and there are multiple ways to stop flooding. One of them is absolutely a dam, and it is a good one to consider. There's also a version that the second picture where instead of a big dam, you do multiple small dams or check structures along the course of a stream. You can also build and create wetlands for off-channel storage. You can also go farther up in the watershed and have less water come screaming down the stream if you increase the amount of water that percolates into the land by using a fundamentally different kind of pavement called pervious pavement. Those are 4 ways to solve one problem, which is we got to reduce the flooding. And so this is a real life example. That group, if you're wondering, talked for 2 years and eventually agreed not to build a dam, and they did some version of all these other pictures. It changes the way you think just by asking why. So what you will notice in our time together is I will ask you why a lot. And I don't intend it to be an interrogation or jerky in any way. It's me trying to understand what's motivating your thinking. I want to know your why. Next slide, Julie. Aha. So think about that interest thing, because I'm going to come back to you here in a minute because I want to hear what yours are. But now I want to talk about, we got our positions, we got our interests, and then we got making public policy is hard. So I want to make sure that we all know and everyone watching understands that when we make public policy choices, it requires trade-offs. We can't do all the things. Trade-offs come in a couple of different ways. Fundamentally, if we do X, we can't do Y. More often, it's if we do X right now, we have to do Y later. This is what you all are talking about when you say there's just not enough money to do all the things. Right. So we choose the things we're going to do now, which means we're not doing some things now. We're either going to do those things not at all, or we're going to do those things later. It is inherent in the project that there are trade-offs and choices to be made. And then similarly, if we pay more or less for X, then there's more or less available to invest in Y. So when we talk about budgets, we talk about money. Where the money goes matters, because it shows what our priorities are and what we're not going to do or we're not going to pay for. Next slide. So making public policy also involves grappling with a bunch of differences that we see among people and in our communities. We have to choose and grapple with differences in the needs, the wants, the interests of people in today's residents, and the needs and wants and interests of tomorrow's residents. Sometimes those things are in alignment and sometimes they're not. Sometimes there's a minority, sometimes there's a majority, and sometimes what they need are not in alignment. We have to choose. We have to grapple with the difference. And we have to grapple with the difference in people's level of comfort with risk. You got conservative people who are like, save all the money, do all the things. We got to be ready for anything, ready for the future, no matter what. Fantastic. Other people are like, I'm willing to roll those dice. I think we're going to come out okay. We have to grapple with differences in levels of comfort with change, with new approaches, with departures from, you know what, we've already done it we've always done it this way. Okay, we've always done it this way. And some people are cool with that. And some people are really okay with, let's try something new. And we have to grapple with levels of comfort or difference in levels of comfort with the unknown. Same kind of concept. Like, if I don't know how the story is going to end, I can't even journey down this path. And other people are like, I don't know, let's try it and see what happens. We'll wing it. We'll respond on the fly. And some people, that makes them kind of stroke out with the stress of it all. We have to grapple with differences in preferences around services and needs. Some people prefer or want different things from government, and some people want more or less. And it relates to the next one, which is perspectives on the role of government. People have different expectations and senses of what government could and should do and should not do. And the last one is, when you're making public policy, boy, do you have to grapple with differences in visions of the community, in expectations for the community. What do people want? Not everyone wants the same thing. And somewhere in all of this, you have to find an answer and carry forward, knowing that there are trade-offs, knowing that it's hard, knowing that some people aren't going to get all the things in all the ways that they want. And it's tough. And we're going to talk about a lot of these things in the course of our time together. Next slide. So here's the scoop, my friends. We are going to have a short presentation. And it's not really short, it's shortish. It's longer than what you're accustomed to because they've answered all your questions, I hope. And again, this is a new approach. You didn't get a big old packet. What you got is slides today. It's going to unpack these assumptions and the expectations. Then we're going to take your questions. And I want you to identify any questions that you've had that were not answered. I would encourage you not to ask staff to wing an answer on the fly, but let's flag them and get them recorded for future conversations, and we'll get back to you with those answers, either in a future slide deck or in a written format. And then I want you to talk. I want you to talk to each other like people, like humans, like neighbors. Like, what do you think about that? That was interesting. I did not know that. That was surprising. Oh my gosh. What? Whatever. The thing I want to stress the most is this item here on the bottom, which is tonight's meeting, we're not making policy recommendations or decisions, right? We're just talking. So we can just talk. What if we do this? What if we try that? How about that? Next slide. So for tonight's conversation and for each of these workshops, I would love it if you would join me in the use of your first names do it. It's weird when I'm the only one doing it. You guys have to do it with me. Call each other, like you're human people. You know that, right? Like you're actual people. Use your first names. It helps connect. It really does. I'll ask you just to trust me. I'm also going to ask you to assume good intentions. Every single person in this meeting wants to do what's right for the city and its residents. But also you have different views on what that looks like. I'm going to ask you to acknowledge the range of views and the diversity, because reasonable people can disagree about how to solve a problem. And guess what? They totally do. Reasonable people disagree and still solve problems all the time. It's the nature of the beast. So be optimistic that we can get through this together. It's going to be great. Ask questions of staff, ask questions of each other, and ask to understand the information, not to convince anyone of your own opinion, right? The outrage in the form of a question, that's not helpful. If you have a question, share it. If you have an idea, share it. Where you're going to disagree, I'm going to ask you to be civil and respectful. And one way we do that is, instead of saying things like, that's wrong, that's dumb, and you would never do this, but you suck, we say things like, you know what, I remember that differently, or that's not how I understood it, or I thought that. Those are much better ways of communicating. And then this last one is, this is the Whopper, friends. I'm really going to ask you to be open and to be creative. Think about, what if we did this differently? What if we tried this thing? What if we integrated that and that? What if we did that instead? Did that faster or slower or bigger or different? What if? Could we do this? Could we try that? Have we done that? And yes, if. Yes, I think that's a great idea if you can find a way to address this outlying thing that we haven't quite talked about. Yes, yes, if. So think about your what ifs and your could we's and how about you and some yes ifs as we go forward, because I think it will change the way you have a conversation with each other. And it will change the way you can have a conversation with the community. Hey, community, what if we did this? What do you think? So that's the quick and dirty of it. What I want to do is ask you to think about your interests. I am very mindful of the time, and instead of having us chat about them, I'm wondering if I could ask you each to put one or more interests that are motivating you in this conversation into the chat, and I will record them. The other thing I want everyone to know is a member of my staff, Sam Haas, is joining us and is taking very careful and detailed notes. I've asked her to identify not just all the things that you say, but also to keep a specific eye out for interests that have been identified, for what ifs that have been identified, and for assumptions and other such things. And we will bring them back to you, and you'll see those summarized in the meeting summary. So I'd love to have us chat about this more, but I really want you to hear what Julie's done. So if you'd be willing to put your interests in the chat, we'll grapple with them. If you're wondering if you have to have an interest, you completely do, because everyone's got one. And then we'll share them with each other as we carry on. Dave, question, comment?
I'm just curious if that's an open meetings problem for us to type stuff in there, even if we're going to read it, because we've always been encouraged to not put any kind of question or anything more than, hey, I have a question or I need a bio break in the chat.
I am 100% sure that is not an open meetings violation, but I'm also 100% sure that I am not a lawyer. CMO, city attorney, are you concerned about folks putting their interest in the chat box?
Hello.
Particularly as our guiding policy, I kind of agree with Councilor DeMont's concerns.
I don't know if Dave is on the call or not. I thought Dave was. If he's not, I don't mind giving you my advice. It's not legal, so an opinion. I'm comfortable with it as long as Heather describes what you put in the chat box. I think Heather should talk about that and share that as a part of the conversation here, and I think you'll be fine.
Heather's 100% going to do that, because that's the whole point of the conversation, is for you to share your ideas with each other. If you'd like to spend the time now, and I mean, I would prefer to hear you verbalize it, but my concern is that we're going to run out of time. If you're comfortable going late so we don't run short on Julie, I think we could invest that time now. Anyone have a preference?
Heather, I think one of the things that you pointed out, we are not making policy, we're having a discussion. And I kind of agree with the city manager. If this was in a different situation where we're only talking about generalities, I would go with what Councilor DeMont and Councilor Seiss have both said, that would be potentially making policy, but we are not making policy of any kind tonight. We're not voting on anything.
Anita, you cool with that? Fantastic. Dave, you cool?
Sure.
Fantastic. Then hook me up with your interests, man. Members of the community who are watching, as you're thinking about your preferences and thoughts on this topic, if you wanted to share your interests with council or through the email on the website, I think that would be fantastic and might help us all better understand how you all are thinking about this issue. And council members, while you are doing that, Julie, if you would want to go ahead and progress to the next slide, I'm going to give them a couple of quick minutes to do that, and then we'll jump into your thoughts. And see, oh, this is good, you guys. You're good at this. I'm seeing public health, safety, sustainability, balancing structural needs with resident pricing, protecting public health, investing in our community, affordability, conservation. Oh, you guys are so good at this. Every once in a while I get a group that says, we understand, and then they give me a whole bunch of positions. I'm like, ah, crap, I got to do the whole thing again. Not this group. All right. As they're noodling, I have 1, 2, 3. All right, council members. I'll give you 1 more minute, and then we're going to jump in with Julie, and we can circle back, and you can continue to pop those in there as we're going along. But I do want to make sure you're paying attention to Julie because she's got a banging presentation. There's pictures. There's animation. There are no kittens, but there probably should be. All right.
There should always be kittens.
Shouldn't there always be kittens?
There should.
No. All right. All right. I was supposed to say, fellas, need to see you in there too. Now I see it. Oh, Rich was the first one. I wronged you, Rich. All right. So yeah, you did, Heather. You suck. Okay. All right. As folks are noodling on those, Julie, you have prepared a presentation in response to council's questions that they shared with me. Council said a lot of things to me, and I tried to categorize their questions pretty broadly. And then what turned out to be a complete jerk move, I gave you like questions with 17 parts. And so you have heroically developed a slide deck that addresses them in all their 17 parts. So take it away, friend.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Here we go. So meeting 1 is going to cover water and wastewater infrastructure together. In the utility, we view them as system parts. I'm going to respond to all the questions, like Heather said, and I actually have question number 1 and so on. And after my response to the questions, I have a pause slide to ask you all, what are your questions, comments, and discussions on the response? And then I'll move on when we're ready. So geeking out here, and indulge me please just for a minute, I want to go over a schematic of the entire utility system on the way to getting to question number 1. So when we talk about rates, what are the infrastructure pieces that we talk about? We start with the water source, which includes our water supply portfolio, all the ditches, Stanley Lake, raw water pipelines, and downstream raw water reservoirs. We talk about water treatment plants. City has 2. We're planning for a 3rd. Talk about potable water storage tanks. We have several spread out throughout the city, and they serve water that we need every day, water in case of a fire flow, and they would help us with water storage in times of drought. We have water pipelines. We have water pumping stations. It's a building with pumps in it that help us to get water from point A to point B at the flow and pressure that our customers want. Here's our customers: homes, schools, churches, hospitals, businesses. Wastewater pipelines when our ratepayers are done with the water. Sometimes we have to pump the sewage, can't flow by gravity, and there's pumps, point A to point B. and then they go on to the wastewater treatment plant. The city owns and operates Big Dry Creek wastewater treatment facility that treats about 75% of the city's wastewater. The other percentage goes down to Metro Water Reclamation Facility, and we pay a fee to have them treat. We have a reclaimed water treatment plant, and we have reclaimed pipelines. Those are all of the infrastructure that goes in to rates. So say the schematic doesn't work for you, I want to show you one more thing. Pie chart. I'm showing you this different way of looking at the infrastructure because Public Works organizes the infrastructure into 15 different utility areas. I'm showing you this slide as well because it gives you a sense of how big certain utility areas are in value compared to the other areas. There are 4 utility areas that make up 86% of this $4 billion utility that we talk about. Water pipelines, sewer pipelines, water supply portfolio, raw water system. These are the 4 biggies. The other utility areas make up, there are 11 remaining utility areas, and they make up 14%. Reclaimed pipeline, meters, pumping stations, both sewer and potable water, 4 different treatment facilities, water quality labs, and our communication system. Thanks for indulging me on that. Now I'm ready to respond to question number 1. What infrastructure is included with water rates? All of our water source, as a reminder, water supply portfolio, ditches, Stanley Lake, raw water pipelines, downstream raw water reservoirs, water treatment plants, we have 2 right now, water storage tanks, pipelines, pump stations. Here's our ratepayers. Not the sewer pipelines, not the lift stations, not the wastewater plant. Yes to the reclaim plant. Yes to the reclaim pipelines. These utility areas all combine into the water rate calculation.
And we're seeing some questions pop up in the chat. I just want to make sure that everyone knows that at the end of each question section, you can ask your questions related to that section. So she'll come back.
So these rates must support 8 utility areas, including 3 of the largest by value in that pie chart. What infrastructure is included when we talk about wastewater rates? So I put big X's on all the water stuff, sewer pipelines, sewer lift stations, sewer pumping stations, and the wastewater plant, as well as the fees to treat down at Metro. So compared to water, these rates support these 3 utility areas, which includes 1 of the largest from that pie chart.
Okay, so we have one question. Anita, do you want to go ahead and ask it?
Sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to know, in the water supply portfolio, does that include our water rights? And then also, are the water rights part of that $4 billion asset, or are they separate?
Water rights are included in that portfolio. We generally value them at $1 billion. They are separate from the $4 billion of the infrastructure.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you. I was confused because they were in water supply portfolio was in the pie chart of the 4 billion, so I got confused. I'm sorry.
No, not confusing. I understand.
I'm sorry y'all didn't see me go through the slide deck originally with staff, where I'm like, okay, I'm sorry, I have like 17 questions on this slide, so do not apologize for having questions. You're doing great. Anybody else have a question on the response to that first question? Okay, I don't see any. Roll along.
Question number 2. What is the age, rate of decline, and history of repair, upgrade, replacement of water and wastewater infrastructure? So to fully respond to this question, I would like to tell you about our process in Public Works to figure out age, rate of decline. If I don't tell you about the process, I would have to say it depends, because we have many different parts of the infrastructure. So kind of hang in there with me. I'll be honest, I have a lot of slides for question number 2.
She does. It's true.
In 2010, Utilities Engineering initiated the long-term planning for capital improvements process or projects. We've completed several cycles, and we are currently in the midst of planning for 2023 and 2024. Sometimes we pick a theme. This year we picked take care of what we own. This is a big deal effort for Public Works. It's over a year long and involves, we talked to just about everyone. The asset database is at the core of long-term planning. I'm sorry, it's a spreadsheet. I live with spreadsheets. I'm going to make this as painless as I can. No tears, please. You, Heather, no crying.
Yes, ma'am.
The asset database is an Excel spreadsheet. It's got about 2,600 lines of assets. Our assets are defined as a thing worth $20,000 or more. When I say asset database, please think about a car. The asset database has all these lines of parts. This car, it's an average mid-sized car like this Buick. A car has lots of different parts. The parts have different O&M needs, different replacement schedules, different importances to the owner. The wipers, the color, the upholstery, the tires, the wheels. Just think car when I say asset database. So it's a pretty big spreadsheet, and I want to run you through the column headings because this is part of our process. For every one of those assets, we talk about the year the asset was installed. We talk about its original useful life based on industry standards. We talk about its stretched useful life because of excellent operations and maintenance within the utility. We talk about the capital replacement year and then the stretched year. This $20,000 concept, this is kind of a dividing line between what we consider an asset and what operations and maintenance can comfortably pay for. They can comfortably absorb something that fails if it's less than 20 grand. More than 20 grand, especially bunches of 20 grand, that's a capital investment. That's a capital asset. Here's the car again. How long do cars last? How many miles? Miles to the tires. This kind of concept. Moving on. We enter the capital plate replacement value, and we include it, we call it fully loaded. It includes all-in engineering, contractor cost, and we track both repair and the replacement cost. We get the cost industry standard books like RS Means that talk about the value of the things. Moving along in the columns, we track criticality, vulnerability, and risk. Vulnerability and risk are important to us because once we get the list of things that are due because they're aged out, we use criticality, vulnerability, and risk to help us refine the highest of highest priorities. So criticality is an assessment of public health and safety, the effect on operations, the degree of environmental harm or violation, and the cost of repair. For each of these categories, we assign points. 0 points is no effect. More points is big effect. When we get to vulnerability, it's an indicator of age and how close to the end of failure the asset is. For example, if we have a thing that it's at its end of industry standard useful life, we're pretty sure it's going to fail within the next 1 to 2 years. It gets a higher number than the thing that was just installed. We use the stretched vulnerability in the same way. Sometimes things can get a little bit longer in their lifespan because of O&M. And then risk is multiplying the criticality times the vulnerability. So there's a lot of math here. I'm not going to hit you over the head with math, but it helps us to make a data-driven analysis of all of our parts. Here's car again. Criticality on cars, for example, it might include the timing belt or the headlights that would lead to your personal health and safety. Some of these items, if you let them go for too long, you end up having to replace the entire transmission, et cetera, et cetera. We can sort the information in the asset database to provide snapshots of different information. For example, sometimes we say things like 25% of our assets are at or beyond their useful life. Well, how do you know that, Julie? We sort the database and all the things that are at their end pop up in a list. And this is a little snapshot to substantiate when we say 25%. I also want to show you this really boring table. And I say this a lot too, the industry standard useful life. We have a table and Excel has this function where you can standardize on certain things. We have many different parts. Things with motors tend to last about 20 years. Concrete, we get 40 to 50 years. So we have a lot of motors and we want their standard useful life to be the same in our asset database. So we use this table. Here's another thing that we say. When we invest $30 million a year in a $4 billion utility, we're investing about 1% per year. That means we replace things at 100-year intervals. The only things on this really boring table that can last 100 years are some of our raw water infrastructure, like ditches, earthen ditches, a generic reservoir. But most of our assets, math, data, not people, not rates, not feelings, they need to be replaced more frequently than 100 years. So we use the data. The data is the data. We use it in many ways. We sort it to make recommendations to ourselves and talk to our colleagues. We can use it to help organize projects. We use it as a decision-making tool internally that gets expanded outwards when we talk to city council, when we talk to residents. Here's part 2, or maybe part 3, sub-part 2 of question 2. Here's another way to view the age, decline, repair, and replacement. The Utility Condition Index, or the UCI. We've talked about this before with City Council, and I want to go and really break it down. I learned a ton by needing to break it down, so thank you for that. We calculate this from the asset database. We calculate the UCI from the asset database. It's essentially a measure of depreciation, where we take the depreciated value over the replacement value. It's a high-level way of asking, how's the infrastructure doing? We use this UCI to describe the infrastructure, but we don't have a direct correlation to identify projects or calculate rates. We borrowed this UCI concept from the Pavement Condition Index, which is used by the Streets Division. And just as a FYI, the American Society of Civil Engineers uses this report card format with grades like A, B, C, D, and F as their way of saying, how's the infrastructure doing? Here's the car again. All right, here's my graph. Hang in there with me. I want to help build this graph with you so you get this level from 30,000 feet in the air, what we're talking about when we say, how's the infrastructure doing? So the parts, the horizontal axis are the years 2013 to 2020. 2013 is when we started talking about the UCI in this manner. The vertical axis is the UCI as a percentage. I'm showing you 0 to 60% for clarity, but I'm going to pop in 100%. A UCI of 100% says something is brand new. A UCI of 0 or 10% says it's nearing the end of its useful life. Now, check out this red line. This red line is at 35%. At 35%, the thing is 65% used up. It's got some life, but it's used up. So when we look at this line, conservative engineers and public works, we're like, okay, we got to put this thing on our list to repair or replace. But never mind the assets. Think about something like a jar of peanut butter. When you get to about 3/4 done with your peanut butter, what do? You put it on the grocery list and you go to the store and buy new peanut butter. This 30%, 35% threshold line, we use it as a tool and an indicator. The peanut butter line, as Heather pointed out, we could drop this down to 10%. We could. We have not done that to date. We could also bump it up to 50% and say, oh my gosh, it's 50% used up, we got it. We don't do that either. Okay. Basic elements of my graph. I'm going to throw something on there. I added this blue line. This represents the water UCI, all of the water utility areas. It was about 50% in 2013. It dipped to 45%, bumped up to 47%. It's on a slowish decline. It's above the 35%. When the city invests more to repair and replace more water infrastructure, the line goes up. But please remember the pie chart. 3 of the 4 largest utility areas by value are represented by this line. It takes a significant investment to get a remarkable uptick in this line. I'm going to throw something else on there. Well, this is the wastewater line. Started at about 50%, slight uptick, drop in 2017, crossed the 35% mark in 2018. Like I said before, this is depreciation. Invest more, bigger bump in the line. This line, there's 3 utility areas that affect the rates, that the rates invest in this utility area line. Sewer pipelines is one of the biggest. So again, it takes a big investment to get an uptick. Throwing on the 2 lines together. Blue line is water, brown line is wastewater, orange line is new. It is the combined UCI for both water and wastewater. The combined line is above 35%. We have said that our goal is to halt the decline. However, there are significant trade-offs with investing enough to halt the decline. Generally speaking, higher rates result in more investment, which results in a higher UCI number, which results in this orange line going up. In 2013, the infrastructure was 30 to 40 years old. Now we're facing infrastructure 40 to 50 years old. While I was doing this work, I realized we are here at a time when the infrastructure reflective of the population explosions in the 70s and 80s, this was given to us. We are here at this time. We didn't necessarily choose this. And that's what I'm telling myself as I'm thinking about this. This is where we are in the history of this infrastructure. I'm still on question number 2, but you know what I said to myself when I was looking at those lines? Like, holy Toledo, we have invested a lot of money in the past years. What's going on? So I took a look at a couple, well, 4 to be clear, 4 utility areas, and I'm going to start with water storage tanks. I put them in bar chart form instead of in line form. I've got the years on the x-axis starting at 2013, and I've got the utility index in the vertical position like the other one. So in 2013, the city's water storage tanks were basically used up at a UCI of 14%. Since 2013, the city has invested heavily, $24 million in water storage tanks. So over time, the UCI has increased. You can probably think in your times as council, Gregory Hill water storage tanks, improvements to Countryside tank, new elevated storage tanks. The value of this utility is about $69 million. An investment of $24 million had a significant impact on this area. We can ride the wave of this significant investment on these tanks for about 40 years, in the 2050s and the 2060s. And we've got some more tanks, like Northridge is on the list for next year, but this is a happy story right here, my opinion. Okay, here's one, slide 2. Water pipelines. In 2013, the city's water pipelines were at about 50%. And since 2013, we have had investments in water pipelines, but remember, this is the biggest area in the pie chart by value. So we've seen a decline in the UCI. And I want to talk to you about this big jump from 48% to 45%. Please remember that this is math. These are numbers. And I'm going to liken it to when you're turning 21, the night before, you cannot legally go to the bar and get a drink. But magically, the day after, the clock ticks over and you can get a drink. We have some pipelines in the system that are still in the ground from the 1960s. They hit their end of useful life per industry standard in 2020, rolling over 2019, 2020. So there's this big decrease. The pipelines, they're on their own path for condition, but that's why the big jump. I wanted to point that out because it was a question Heather raised and it was a good clarification. Here's my first wastewater example. Also a very happy story. So this is lift stations, sewage pumping stations. So in 2013, the city's lift stations were at about 50%. Lift stations are pretty important. A failure could lead to an environmental spill, leading to public health and safety issues. So we invested heavily. The UCI has improved. The utility area value is about $22 million, and we've invested a little more than $8 million since 2015. We have 3 lift stations remaining. We're doing a nice job with these, and it's protecting both public health and safety and the environment. This is my opinion. We can ride the wave of these investments for about 20 years on the pumping aspects of these lift stations. We can get more life out of the pipelines and the concrete. Concrete will be 40, 50 years. Last one on this, I promise. Sewer pipe. 2013, it was about 50%. And the sewer pipe, it hit the end of useful life in about 2017. Sorry, the numbers are very small. And so this is a big driver in that sharp decline of the brown line below 35%. So please recall the pie chart, because the sewer pipeline is one of the 4 biggest utility areas. We have about 450 miles of sewer pipe in the city. You're thinking, Julie, we invested in the Little Dry Creek Interceptor Sewer. We are investing in the Big Dry Creek Interceptor Sewer. Rough numbers, $55 million. Why is the UCI declining? It's a very large dollar utility area. And the 55 million was spread out over more than 10 years. To make a solid increase in these bars or uptick in that line, I'm not saying we need 55 million every year, but we need a consistent large investment in this very large utility area to improve the condition. That was my last slide for question number 2.
And we have a few questions about your slides. And let's start with Anita. You had a question early on. Oh, we're not hearing you. Anita, are you still muted? We can't hear you, so we're gonna come back to you. It looks like you're unmuted, so I'm not sure what the situation is. Maybe that's her. Oh, she's frozen. That's not a good sign. All right, while we work on getting Anita's technology sorted out, Catherine, you also had a couple of questions. Go ahead.
Yeah, I feel like this was really well done, Julie, and thank you for the presentation. I feel like it may have sparked more questions for me though than than I understood. So let me see if I can get answers to a couple of them. First of all, is the Excel spreadsheet with the detailed breakdown of asset on the web page for the public to view?
The entire spreadsheet, the public can view the snapshots like you saw in the PowerPoint.
Okay, okay. So you explained the 35% that, you know, we could have said 10%, we could have said 50%, but I don't remember hearing you say exactly why we chose 35%, just that that is what we chose. And so did we have specific reasoning for choosing 35%?
Mm-hmm. We chose 35% because at that, if we take as the baseline, let me talk about the car. I'll talk about the car. When a car is, say a car is supposed to last 10 years. When the car is at about the 7-year mark, I'm just making this up. I'm not a car person. If I could talk about pumps, then that'd be so much. Stop, Julie. When you're starting to get to the end of useful life in a car, bigger things start breaking and they cost more to repair and replace, in my experience. It's the same with our utility assets. And so when they start breaking, and whether they're a repeat break of the same thing, which is an operations and maintenance cost and time commitment, or the part has lasted 17 years, but the manufacturer no longer supports that thing, it's industry standard that it's about time to put it on the list for repair and replacement. And in our experience, over 10 years of doing long-term planning, Our list of things at the end of useful life is this long. And the budget allows us to take care of this many things. So the other things get shoved and deferred into the future years. And so by recognizing them at the 35% level, it kind of gets them in the queue. If we waited longer, I think the same sort of things would happen. We would still have a finite budget, the highest of highest priorities, but between 35 and 10%, we might find ourselves in a place where the things that are breaking cost more to fix. And depending on what it is and how much redundancy or reliability we have, we might find ourselves inconveniencing customers more with interruptions to water or sewer service, pipeline breaks. So it's not entirely arbitrary. It's based on industry standard, and it's all piling in that whole industry standard useful life, city experience with the bulk of the things. And it's just been a helpful way for the utility to make lists, develop budgets, and prioritize.
So that was really good. I want to see if I can sum this up so that I can make sure I understand. So 35% is kind of the red flag goes up. Hey, we need to start thinking about, we're going to have to replace this. And we could let it go another 10%, possibly even 25%, depending on how fast it seems to be deteriorating. But if we wait too long, it could break on us, and then we have a situation where we have residents who don't have service. So we need to make sure that we're getting in there and getting it fixed in a timely manner so that everybody can actually flush their toilets and open their drains for water when they need to. Okay. And my final question is that you talked about the water storage units, and those have been a hot topic in our city. We just replaced 2 down on Observatory Hill. We're currently replacing 2 more, and we're, as I understand it, potentially going to replace the ones right by the city hall as well. So they're all kind of getting replaced in a manner. Do we use bonds when we replace those, or are we paying? How are we paying for those? Like, where does that money come from?
In a very general way of speaking, the city has used both. We call it cash when it's ratepayer fees, and we have issued debt.
And Chris is going to talk about that in so much more detail next at our next workshop. If that's enough of an answer for tonight. Is that okay, Catherine?
It's good. Yep. And those are all my questions. Thank you, Julie.
Excellent. Thank you, ma'am. Rich, you had a question?
Yes, on major pump stations, how many in total do we have and how many have we replaced?
On the water pumping stations,
Yes.
we have 7 major pumping stations in the city. Gregory Hill, Countryside, Wandering View recently got an upgrade. We're working on High Service Pump Station right now. We have some other smaller pump stations. Silo Pump Station is on the list, not in the close years. There is a Zone 14 pump station in historic Westminster that is coming up, but not in 21 or 22. There are a couple of pump stations associated with the Northwest Water Treatment Plant. They've recently got a bit of a pump upgrade. I think those are in fairly good shape. So we're doing pretty good on pump stations.
And then how many total water storage tanks do we have, of the large ones?
I'm staring at a map on my wall.
Oh, I thought you were like actually running through your mind going 1, 2, 3, 4, and that you had it on your head.
I do that too. I'm sorry. We have about 10. And I'm really sorry if I fluffed the numbers on these. Approximately 10.
And we've replaced about 6.
Gregory Hill has 2. Countryside was upgraded. We built a brand new elevated storage tank. That's 4 on my fingers. What am I missing?
Did we, North Park?
North Park tanks are on the Wandering View site, and those were rehabbed in 2012-ish. They are in the out years because they are steel tanks, and I can talk about steel tanks a little bit later.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. Lindsay, you had a question.
Yes, thank you. So I have a couple, and if we have plans to talk about them later, I'm more than willing to wait. So feel free to say that we'll explain more later. But so with these spreadsheets, as a staff member in another organization, having spreadsheets and having a good base on where your assets are important. So just the question that came to mind was, so if we had these spreadsheets, why does it seem that we're in such a dire need to increase the rates for replacement? So if we already had a level of where we're currently at, why such a need right now? That, because it feels from the outside that we weren't watching our utility, that we weren't watching the O&M of replacement. And so to me, it's concerning that it feels that it's, oh my gosh, we need to get a moratorium in place. We need to start replacing and increase our rates. I understand that we did a survey, I believe it was back in 2018 as an audit for where we're at with these rates. But if we already had a snapshot of where all of these assets are, why are we, I'm still not getting the why, as Heather was alluding to in the beginning, why are we at where we're at?
Did the need suddenly sneak up on you? Or did you see it coming?
You want me to answer that?
Yeah. Or is it on another slide?
Not on a slide. You're saying. So I've been with the city about 7 years, and when I arrived at the city, it was in the early days of this long-term planning process. I believe in my heart of hearts that the people who came before me did the best they could with the information they had available. My predecessor said of this database, now we know. What other people do with this information, we can provide it. But it's sort of like this conversation that we have with residents, city council members, ourselves. It's a trade-off, Lindsay. We know, but what is the true cost to fund everything all the time? I could tell you, but I would cry. It's astronomical. It's not the responsible way to use ratepayer money to fund every single thing all the time. And so what we do with the data is we package it and we make projects out of it, and we put the highest of highest priorities. And in my city experience, this data-driven method is how we've done it.
Okay, I'll probably dig more into that as we go, because I still don't feel feel that
Yep.
that I've got my answer, and that's
Well-
okay. This is the first of conversations, so I'd hope by session 4 that I feel comfortable enough to be able to reiterate that to our residents, because I don't feel confident in that. So with that though.
Do you want to give her another chance? I think she's really itching to try to get you a better answer.
Oh,
She might-
sure.
Yeah, you look like you want to try again. You good? You can try again later. It's a tough one.
All right, Heather?
I am not going to throw under the bus the people that came before me. I respect them as the people who were looking out the best for the city in the time they lived in the city. I also want to say, we are in this place in our city where the infrastructure is 40 to 50 years old. We didn't choose to be here when these bulky, costly things were happening, but we are. People who came before me didn't necessarily have to face industry standard useful life on 25% of the utilities infrastructure. So I'll add that.
I'd like to add something here. So I've been doing this work for an awful long time, multi-generations. And from the beginning of the time that I've done this work in the 1970s, very consistently, every place I've worked, and I've worked at a number of outstanding organizations with terrific staffs and very dedicated elected officials, this is not at all uncommon to get to a point in time when either information is improved through the ability to collect better information, or things just get older, or you go through a series of economic downturns and public policy decisions are made to not continue to increase revenue on an ongoing basis as much as might be preferred. Those are all things that factor. And, you know, it's not just in our utility. Our streets are in similar conditions. Our buildings are in similar conditions. Mayor and council, I'll remind you that we did an infrastructure study on the entire infrastructure system when I first took the job, and we discovered that we were at least $1.5 billion behind what we really needed in 15 years. So that's, you know, that's a reality. And it's not just our reality. It's a reality of most governments, because government has a very difficult time adequately funding, keeping up with this infrastructure. In this particular case, we've got people who care an awful lot about service levels and making sure that we maintain what they believe to be the acceptable industry standard service level. And so we've made these recommendations to the council along the way, knowing that this would be difficult. But thank you for spending the time you're spending to learn and understand, and you'll have some options, as Heather described, moving forward to impact those decisions and the pace and the risk that you decide to take as a governing body moving ahead. I know I wish I could give you an absolute answer and name a smoking gun, but they're not there. You know, if this is a 40 or 50-year-old city ostensibly that grew from 20,000 to 100,000 people between 1970 and the year 2000. The infrastructure from our treatment plants and pumps and motors and pipes is in that 40 to 50-year time frame. So it mostly went in 1980. It was paid for in 1980 through water taps. It wasn't paid mostly through ratepayers. Now it's paid mostly through ratepayers, because, you know, our water taps really are not that great anymore. So here we are. But you'll have a chance to try to understand it more and get better questions, get better answers to all of your questions along the way. And then at the end, decide the approach that you wish to take as governing this enterprise.
And Lindsay, Max wants to take a run at your question too. And then I'm going to ask council if y'all want to keep going or take a break because it's 8 o'clock. Max?
Heather, hang on a minute. Council, I want you to refer to your emails. I know you're not tracking them, but we've had a request that came in a few minutes ago from the city attorney. We need to have an executive session tonight, not tomorrow, tonight.
Oh, heavens.
And this is something that just came up. I don't know how much longer, Heather, you and Julie think this particular section will go, but we have a legal issue we have to deal with.
Okay, here's what I would suggest. Let's hear from Max briefly. Let's get you all a break so you can read that email. You'll come back and then Julie and I will figure out how much more time we need, and then we'll make a smart choice about how to proceed. Can we not do that, Anita?
Anita, you're still muted.
Yeah, you're still muted. Your computer is in a mood
No,
tonight.
I don't think that's, yeah, no, I think it's having 3 children with streaming devices. So I think probably we all know what's going on. We also received a text about it, and it's probably better to end this sooner than later so we can get to that session. And so there's no information that we need to read rather than just knowing what the mayor announced. So I'd prefer we just blast through and perhaps add a half hour to our next one of these if my colleagues agree.
Okay.
Because this is not an issue that we can defer the executive session.
It sounds very serious. Julie, we have several more questions. If you were guessing, how much more time do you think we have on all of this? We have several more questions from council on this topic, and then we have more of the general questions in the slide deck.
I know we have 3, 4, 5, and 6. We have more questions remaining than I have already answered.
Okay.
When I did a draft and you had no input, it took me an hour to get through. So I think
I don't think we're going to get through this, Heather. And my suggestion would be to take this to 8:15 tonight. We have a posted 8:30 executive session, which we need to stick to. And then I think we come back and we reload and we look at our schedule moving forward. And it was discussed. Excuse me, I should get my camera on. I apologize. It was discussed that maybe this is going to be stretched out a bit more, and maybe one of the ways that happens is that there's a 5th meeting here. So that my thought would be, this has been a terrific discussion, and but we do need to get to that at 8:30.
Perfect.
I would think that would be a good end to the council members' evening.
Excellent.
Let me make sure that, hang on a head. I'm going to keep interrupting until we get this resolved.
You're cool.
Don, can you confirm that we've already gotten a meeting invite for the executive session?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Because before we come out of this, we're going to have to go through a process, Heather, to acknowledge that we're going into an executive session, which is going to be a requirement.
Okay.
I can also make sure that anything that's been put in the chat box from any of the council members as far as questions, have these all been captured?
Mostly I had people asking, just saying, I have a question, but staff can download the chat box and we can capture all those and carry them over to the next meeting. Absolutely.
Okay.
So I think we're cool there.
All right. So, Julie, I want to give you a chance to go back and finish up your one question. But at 8:15, we're cutting this off. We'll carry it over to the next meeting. And then before we end for the council, we have to go through the normal process of the adjourning from here and then going into an executive session. So you've got till another 10 minutes. And that will also give us a chance to take a short break before we go into executive.
Perfect. Thank you for all. It's complicated, your job. All right. Max, you wanted to help with Lindsay's question. Let's do that and then see where we are on time. Go ahead.
Thank you, Heather. This is Max Kirschbaum, Public Works and Utilities Director. I just wanted to, in less than 60 seconds, just wrap up 2 concepts that Julie had used previously that I think get to the heart of your question. One of those being, and Don began to mention it, is its period of time. So that asset database is based on age and condition, and many of the more expensive assets are now hitting that period in their useful life timeline. It's not that they were neglected earlier, it's that we're arriving at those points now. That that's certainly one of the major factors in why now. The other part that I'd like to hit on is this would be back to maybe the simple math part. If you add up the major capital investment over the last 10 years, going back to about 2010, Julie said this earlier, we've invested at a rate of $33 million per year, water plus sewer infrastructure combined total. So the $33 million per year divided by a $4 billion asset inventory is less than 1% reinvestment per year. That's just the way the investment has gone, and that's where we're at. So those are the two pieces I wanted to add.
Okay. Thanks, Max. Lindsay, we were on your questions. Do you want to start another one now, knowing that we might not get through it, or do you want to roll over to the next conversation?
We'll have to roll over. Yeah.
Okay. Because it's a juicy one.
Well, all my questions are too juicy. Yeah, no, we'll just wait.
Okay, cool. So council members, if you have a pretty straightforward clarifying question and you just want to email that to staff or to me so we can just include the response in Julie's slide deck for next time, that will be fine. Otherwise, bring them with you to the next conversation as you did today. Julie, it looks like you're on deck for at least the first part of our meeting in October. We'll need to figure out what that means for the whole schedule. And so you should probably look forward to getting a doodle or something from CMO so we can keep these things going. Council, I hope that this has felt different to you. It feels different to me from all the ones that I've seen in your conversations before. If you have any suggestions for how we can do it better or differently as we continue to prepare conversations with you on this topic, we would be eager to hear them. Y'all know how to find me by email. You can call me. I love to talk to you and hear the things. So don't be shy. And in the meantime, I'd like to say thanks to Julie. She really leaned in on this presentation, and I think you're going to like what's coming in the next ones. And until then, thanks for having me join you. And Herb, I hand the meeting back to you to do all the official sounding things that you said you were going to do.
All right. Mr. Frankel, are you online?
Yes, I am.
All right. At this time, it's approximately 8:08 p.m. We've had a request from the city attorney's office to go into an executive session, and I will let Mr. Frankel define what that is.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The executive session that's proposed is to consult with the city attorney regarding legal issues associated with upcoming election issues pursuant to Westminster Municipal Code 111.3 C3 and 8, as well as Colorado Revised Statute 246402-4B.
Okay. As defined by the city attorney, we've had a request to enter into an executive session, and I will poll all the council members at this time to make sure that for the record to indicate they are prepared to go into session. Councilor Seymour?
Yes.
Councilor Smith?
Yes.
Councilor Bowles?
Yes.
Councilman Scully?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Sykes?
Yes.
Councilor
Yes. Can you hear?
Yes, I got you. Councilor DeMott?
Yep.
The mayor also. We will adjourn at this time. It is 8:09. We will reconvene to give you some time for a short break. We will reconvene at 8:20 in the executive session. Remember, you must log out of this, go to your calendar invite and get the link for the new one. Plus, remember, you have a passcode you must use. We will see you in 10 minutes. We are adjourned.
Council.
Good night, Heather.
It may appear as an email from Michelle Parker. If it's not popped up on your calendar, it would be an email from Michelle Parker. Thank you.
It's in there.